Okay, thank you everybody for joining us. First presentation meeting of 2024. A big thank you to Cheryl Opperman for coming out tonight. She's going to be presenting tonight on the composition. Again, tonight's presentation on the process for creating effective composition. Cheryl got a really good presentation for our group a couple of years ago. It was during COVID, so it was only on Zoom. So I had not met her before in person or not, but it's really nice that she was able to show up here tonight. The one that she did a couple of years ago was on Antarctica. Still a place on my bucket list. I want to go on one of her trips one of these days for sure. So I'm really excited to have her back tonight. So thank you. Couple things real quick before I get into upcoming events and that. We have a new Facebook members page. Thank you, Darren, for all you've done to help put that together. It's a good place just to see. Sometimes there'll be images, sometimes some things that we have upcoming events get posted there. And also importantly is that every once in a while, just sort of, kind of spontaneous trips pop up or whatever. Now, there's been a couple of those out to Jack, Darren, Chuck, Dave have went out there and that and helped a lot of people in that with compositions and so forth and that. So really good learning opportunities, kind of fun social time to get out. The times that we've done it so far, it's been real early in the morning. Maybe someday we'll do an evening shot, so not everybody has to get out there in the real cold mornings and that. But anyways, if you're not yet on that Facebook member page, if you're on Facebook, I recommend joining them. Just again, keeping up with some events that we have.
Once you set up members,
Yeah, and I think you have to get accepted into like
you have to be a paid member of the club. Because there are going to be some value added things that are going to be.
Take a committee to accept.
Yes, so.
Yeah, so I am.
We vote quarterly on.
Elaine with the committee.
Approving and denying, so she's good.
So if you want to let me, put a little money.
Yeah.
She like,
She sent you another thing to the situation.
So thank you, Brian, and already we've only had that going on for a month, maybe 5 or 6 weeks or so, something like that. But it's already proven to be very valuable in that.
Hey, Michael.
Yeah.
Speaking of dues, you're now gonna get an invoice from, it says Loki Photo Club and then it's zohobooks.com or whatever. Some people have been getting into your spam, so you might check for that. And it's got a button to pay now in the email, and then there's also a PDF invoice. So if the pay now button on the email doesn't work, open the PDF invoice and at the bottom there'll be a PayPal button you can click that usually works. Because we were having some problems. I gotta talk to them.
There was a Venmo button. There was a Venmo button too.
Yeah, you get it, so that's your PayPal, but you use either one. But on the email invoice one didn't seem to work, but the PDF version worked. So I don't know. But it makes life easy for us because it records all the transactions. I don't have to double touch them. Anyway.
And those member dues will come up in the month you were first registered.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like everybody is in January.
Right. We went through the list and everybody in January gets theirs January. Everybody gets first of the month. So, you'll go through and you'll get an invoice. And we set them up to go out forever. So you're in the club for life.
Members for life.
As long as you pay your dues.
As long as it's
Chuck was just pointing out on your name tag, you probably have a month.
The bottom under your name. You don't have them.
Oh, in January?
You give it to be a member.
So membership. So anyway, thank you. Thanks for those updates. Couple of upcoming events that we've got over the next few months. February 7th, that's our first competition of the year. So first Wednesday in February, and that one is open. So we've got some themes. I'll go over those here in a second, but the very first competition, February 7th, is going to be open. We'll announce a judge very soon. I've got a couple of emails out, so I'll let you know in the next couple of days who the judge will be. But again, February 7th, the first competition. 2 weeks later, the third Wednesday is February 21st. We have wildlife storytelling through a bird photographer's lens. Tips beyond basic sharp focus with Lone Tree Photo Club member Paul Malinowski. So it's February 21st. March 6th, we have a exhibition night. We just had one of those 2 weeks ago, I guess it was. And good opportunity to submit 3-4 images, talk about them. Members here will offer suggestions. Again, it's not a judged event in that, but a good opportunity to get some feedback on your images. Tell a little bit of the story about what you were thinking about when you took those images. And I was a good real learning experience. So that one is March 6th. March 20th, we have Ben Evans, who's here tonight. He will be presenting on hummingbird photography. Now, remember a couple pretty good awards that he got last year, a couple really unique hummingbird images that he got, real interesting techniques that he uses. So he'll be sharing those with us on March 20th. April 3rd, competition. This will be our first themed competition, and that one is going to be on motion and leading lines. April 17th, we have Elaine Graves presenting on lighting. May 1st, the next exhibition night. I've already kind of explained what that is, but that will be on May 1st. And then May 15th, we have wildlife photography with Carino Zaragoza. What I don't have on here is the date of, we have the workshop with Elaine on lighting.
So the presentation will be April 17th,
Right?
and then the workshop is the 20th in this room. And it'll be $30 a person, limited 10. And I think we're waiting for Kathy to get the PayPal stuff out, and then we can send it out.
Okay.
And then she's gonna have a survey she'll send out to participants.
Okay. Okay, great. I mentioned earlier that we have three themed competitions this year. The first one I already mentioned, April 3rd, is motion leading lines. July 3rd, although it might get pushed into the 1st of August, but the one that we have scheduled for either the 1st of July or 1st of August is environmental portraits and high key. October 2nd is light painting and macro. A couple of other things that are going on right now. Over at City of Lone Tree, the Lone Tree Art Center has Exploring the Light. The entries, the call for entries just opened this past week. And so those are open now through, the deadline is February 20th. So you still got some time to put those in. But I know many of us have entered that in the past. There's cash awards that are available to it. And also you get, if your images are selected, they're on display at some of the events that take place over at the, this is, yeah. So Darren White, our member here, Darren White is the judge. So we're happy to have, we're happy to have Darren be the judge for this year's event.
Yeah. No. Unmarked bills in a brown paper bag.
There will also be a opening reception March 29th. That's always a fun time. I know we usually have a pretty good attendance from our group that goes there. It's the evening, and that one is an evening event, and it's March 29th. And then the images are on display all the way to, I believe it's June 12th. Let's see. Oh, let me go over the categories also. The categories for this year's event are animals, architecture, landscape, long exposure, macro photography, portraits, street photography, and travel. So I think is that 8? So 8, there's a wide range of categories this year in that. So with that, if there aren't any questions, I'm going to go ahead and do a quick introduction of tonight's guest. Cheryl Opperman, again, thank you for coming out tonight. Cheryl is a nationally acclaimed nature photographer who traveled every continent in the world, capturing spectacular images of nature, wildlife, and indigenous cultures. Her photographs have been widely published, appearing in print, on the web, television, solo, and group exhibits. Her list of clients and credits include the American Humane Association, Overseas Adventure Travel, the Denver Post, the National Geographic Society, Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History. Her aesthetic compositions, artistic use of light, and exquisite detail have been honored with several prestigious awards from organizations including Earth Day Network, Nature's Best Photography, the International Photography Awards, and National Wildlife Federation. She was also featured in as a leading female photographer by Afro Photographer magazine, and has appeared on camera interviews by 9 News in Denver, The Luminous Landscape, and Smithsonian Earth. Using the power of photography to inspire interest in the environment and other cultures, she's presented keynote addresses or classes on various topics to schools, camera clubs, that would be us, the Intermountain Regional Headquarters of the National Park Service, the Crane Trust, Denver Audubon, the Colorado Environmental Film Festival, and the North American Nature Photography Association. Cheryl is a 1992 honors graduate of Brook Institute of Photography, holding a Bachelor of Arts degree in Industrial Scientific Photography. So that's one of the longest bios that I've had to get. So I tried to get that as quickly as I could, but a lot of great information in there. So with that, we're really excited to see tonight's presentation. So again, if nobody else has any questions, we'll go ahead and turn it over to Cheryl.
All right, well, thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here. There's a great turnout here and a great turnout online. So thank you all for joining me. I really appreciate that. Let me just get things started here so we can get the Zoom presentation up and going. I have to share my screen. Get everything loaded. With any luck, there we go. How about that? Worked. That's great. It's always a good sign. Oh, thank you for getting the lights. Well, wonderful. Well, tonight I'm going to be talking about the process for creating effective compositions. So hopefully I will give you some new ideas about how to look at compositions, and then we'll take questions at the end. So, you know, if you have something, just keep those in mind, and I'll make sure that I answer them when we finish. There we go. Okay. All right. So if you really think about it, photography is basically a language that allows us to communicate. So in written language, we combine letters to express our ideas. In photography, we combine compositional elements to express our ideas. So similar to a sentence, when an image is composed effectively, the intended message will be clear. As photographers, it's our job to lead viewers on a journey through our images. We can control what they see, where they look, and sometimes even what they think. Compositions help you answer the most fundamental question. Why are you taking the picture? So how do you create effective compositions? Well, first, you have to define what you're trying to communicate. So the message can be simple, such as a feature, like a waterfall, or a bird, like a bald eagle, or even a flower, like this iris petal. Or it can be a complex concept or an emotion. So when you look at this image, you might think of words like warm, isolated, wilderness, unspoiled, and beautiful. Even wildlife can communicate complex concepts. So obviously this is a picture of a loon with its chick, but it also represents ideas such as motherhood, protection, and it's serene. Or when you look at this lion, you might think about the predator-prey relationship, life and death, or maybe it just brings to mind a healthy snack. So keep in mind, it's just as easy to miscommunicate with photographs as it is with words. But good composition will help minimize misunderstanding. So next, you'll need to observe your surroundings. Don't photograph the first thing you see. Look around. You know, sometimes the best image may be behind you, above you, or even 2 miles away from where you are. So in this image, I was in Alaska and I was photographing bald eagles in beautiful front lit light, landing on ice in front of the water. And some of you may have seen my eagle picture that won for the National Wildlife Federation, and that was at the same time. But, you know, I took a moment to look around and I saw the sun setting behind me. And I didn't know if I was going to have an eagle fly right through the sun, but, you know, I set up because it looked very promising. And luckily I did. This isn't, you know, put together. This is actually the way it happened. So, you know, take a moment, even if you have something really nice in front of you, take a moment to look around because there might be another opportunity that you're missing. This was in Nebraska. And again, I was photographing snow geese that were on a lake, and it was a wonderful situation. But then they all blasted off, and I took my blast off photographs, but I looked up into the air and, you know, they were just spread across the sky. So I captured that and then converted it to black and white. So again, just really observing all of your surroundings and not just, you know, one area of the environment. This was in New Zealand, and I got there, you know, in the afternoon, but I could tell that from a lower angle, I wasn't going to get something as dramatic. So there was an opportunity to go up to an overlook, and that worked out really well. So I headed up there for sunset, and it was just a much nicer perspective. Next, we have to make equipment choices. So choosing the right equipment is very important. You know, this could even mean just using your cell phone instead of your digital SLR. So it could even mean just using your cell phone instead of your digital SLR. And, you know, a lot of times people ask me, you know, what equipment should I take on this trip? And that happened to me in the fall last year. I had a friend who was going to Nepal, and he said, well, what camera should I take? I said, well, what are you going to do with your images? He said, post them online. I said, well, are you going to print them? He said, no. I said, are you going to, you know, is there anything else that you're going to do with them besides putting them online? And he said, no. And I said, then, and you probably can't carry a lot of weight with you. And he said, that's right. I said, take your phone. I mean, the phones are really good nowadays. So, you know, that may be the best choice depending on the circumstance. Now, if you're taking digital SLRs or mirrorless cameras, you're going to want something more. And zoom lenses will allow you to change your compositions quickly. So I often recommend zoom lenses. Wide angle lenses exaggerate distance, while telephoto lenses compress distance. So understanding what your lenses do to your composition is also important. Gimbal style heads with a leveling base work best for wildlife and landscapes. That's what I use 95% of the time. So a gimbal head is extremely helpful in ensuring that the horizon line remains straight, and it allows you to quickly change its placement in the composition without having to re-level the camera. So that's one of the primary reasons I use it all the time. However, I do think ball heads work really well for northern lights that are happening all over the sky and for macro photography. You might be tilting at different angles, and so it gives you a little bit more flexibility. And Acrotech makes a really nice ball head that also can function like a panoramic head or a gimbal style head as well. So that's a really good option if you're doing a trip where you're going to have both types of subjects. So in this example, whenever I go to photograph northern lights, I usually set up several cameras, and I'll put my gimbal or panoramic head on one. And so if I have a horizon line, I concentrate on those shots with the gimbal head. And then when there are things going on in the sky, I can have a ball head that's flexible, and then I can point any direction at any angle that I want. And that works really, really well to get the best compositions. So the equipment that you choose will help to make your best compositions possible. So again, for macro photography, I chose a macro lens. I used a ground tripod so I could get low to the ground. I chose a ball head again so I could get those angles. I used a macro focusing rail, which helps me focus in a much easier way than if I'm trying to just keep moving the tripod, and a cable release. So take along anything that will give you options to change your perspective. So things like a step stool or a seat, and this one collapses flat, so I can just, put it at different heights or different levels, and it's strong enough that I can stand on it as well. I always try and take a ground cloth so that I don't have to lie on the, dirty ground if it is dirty. And as I'm getting older, I like to take my knee pad along. So, sometimes I'll wear knee pads if I know I'm going to be on my knees a lot, but you can take these little gardening pads as well, and they work great. So the next thing we're going to do is pre-visualize the end result. So we're going to take a mental picture first, and imagining the final image will really help you decide how to compose it. So what do you want that final image to look like? And we can use tools to help pre-visualize as well. We can use grid lines in our viewfinder. I don't use those as much for wildlife, but for landscapes, I think they're very effective. And then there's a really good composition phone app that I think is valuable. If you're struggling with your compositions, this is a great thing to put on your phone. Obviously, it's not going to overlay on your camera, but you can use your phone first to kind of help you get a guide of what you want to do, and then compose your camera to match that. It's by Wise Camera. I think it's available for both Android and iPhones. I have an iPhone, so it works really well on that. And it's great because it lets you overlay all of these different compositional tools. So you can either choose rule of thirds, and if that's not working well for you, you could switch. So there's the rule of thirds, but you can easily just move up and switch to vanishing point, and it will show you what that light looks like right over your composition. So it's extremely helpful if you're struggling with compositions, because really grid lines on our camera back only give us, vertical and horizontal lines. So this really lays out all of your compositional designs. So any of you who've done anything with me or know of my work probably know I really do like to composite images. I like to sandwich things together. When I don't, if I can capture an image all at once, that's great, and I always try to do that. But there are a lot of times where you might see elements that are really fantastic, but they don't make an image in themselves. So this was during the fires that we had several years ago, and the sun was just amazing as it was setting. But I really wanted to, add an element to this. So I do raptor workshops here in town very often, usually once or twice a year at least. And so I had the owl out, and it was being held by the raptor educator. I work with raptor education groups where these are birds that have either been injured or imprinted on humans, so they cannot be released back into the wild. So they're used for educational purposes, and it's a great way to learn photography. But it didn't look so good just, on the glove. So I took another picture of a log, and then in Photoshop, just combined those three. And it works, makes a very nice image. So, thinking ahead about your compositions and how you might be able to use the computer, if you'd like to do that sort of thing, to create a really effective image and composition. You can do in-camera multiple exposures. This was one that I did actually in the film days on film. And this is an image that I was actually thinking about before I went to Africa. I wanted to do overlapping trees. I love the acacia tree, and I thought, wouldn't it be fun to do some multiple exposures? I can tell you it was a lot more difficult to do it on film than it is nowadays, because nowadays when you do multiple exposures in camera, you can see the overlap. But I had to do it blind, and I just took several. But this one I thought came out really nicely, so it worked out well. You can also use multiple exposures, in a more creative way for overlapping fall color. So this is just a bunch of exposures and just moving the camera a little bit for each one, and it gives it kind of an impressionistic look. So think about, how you can use some of those tools in your compositions. We also want to obey the rules, and there are a lot of rules in photography and composition, as we all know. And we're going to for this particular image, it just nicely follows the rule of thirds. When we overlay the line, we can see that our subjects are in those ideal positions that we'd like to have for the rule of thirds. And obviously, this is a little more challenging with wildlife, but it's something that we want to look for. Whenever you're photographing wildlife, you want to be thinking about composition too. And rule of thirds doesn't have to be two subjects in the frame. This was a slow shutter speed blur, panning blur shot that I did. But I think what makes it really work, there's a lot of blur in this. Some people don't like it. I like to experiment with that sort of thing. I think it's fun and, again, impressionistic. But I think what really makes this work is that we've got one sharp snow goose in that rule of thirds position in the lower right. And rule of thirds isn't the only grid that we can use. There's the phi grid, which is based on the golden ratio, which is a mathematic ratio that appears a lot in nature, and it's deemed to be very aesthetically pleasing. And it just puts the lines actually a little bit closer together. And again, I've got the eyes positioned at those intersections. So it makes for a very nice composition. So symmetry breaks the rule of thirds, but it works really well to balance the image. So it just basically splits it in half. And with a reflection, on a river or a pond, that works really well. It can work with wildlife as well. Filling the frame is another simple tool of composition. Just making sure that you don't have a lot of extra space in the image that you don't need. The use of diagonals is a lot more effective than having something just straight up. If this branch were just sticking straight up, it wouldn't be as interesting a composition as it is coming in at a diagonal. So again, this image breaks the rule of thirds by putting the subject in the center of the image, but it does use diagonals to direct you through the image. One that takes you back and then toward the center. We can use things like leading lines and S-curves, again, to lead the viewer through the image. There's the rule of odds that says it's nicer to compose with an odd number of subjects than an even number. And in this image, that works exceptionally well. But even numbers can work too. The background of an image is really, really important. And while this is a nice bird and it's beautiful, it's not as effective as if I can go to a background that's cleaner and not as distracting like this. So watching your background can really improve your compositions a lot. Framing is another great technique. You can do it with trees and branches and things like that, or caves. In this situation, I illuminated the inside of the cave, but I could have left it dark too, and just concentrated on the sunrise. And if I'd had more clouds in the sky, I might have done that. But I think where I didn't have as much interest in the sky, it was really nice to add that light to the inside of the cave. Color can be used as a compositional element. So most of the tones in this image are the same except for the sack and the eyebrows. So, that tells me exactly where to look at the image, right? Following the color. The warm and cool tones of this image complement one another, creating a greater sense of depth in the image. Patterns can be an effective composition in themselves. So this is obviously butterflies from Mexico, the migration, which is really spectacular. And it just makes for wonderful patterns. Cracked mud is also great for patterns. And it was nice to find, another type of cracked mud. So I've got the wider cracks and then the smaller cracks to give the composition more interest than just having the larger cracks alone. Repetition, something else to look for. When you see mountains that are stacking on top of each other and with the haze, that can be very dramatic. Including elements for scale is also very important. I mean, these mountains are from China, they're beautiful, but having the little boat and man down there gives you a sense of how large the mountains are. So anytime you have something it's hard to define how big they are, try and put something in your image for scale. And there are many more rules, but those are some of the main ones. We also want to select our vantage point. So we need to think about where to position our camera. You know, sometimes we might be better off lying down on the ground. So for this penguin, there was wind that day, which was really nice because it helped to ease the transition between the ground and the water. But lying on the ground also helped that too. I was able to get more water in the background and a smoother transition so that, again, my eye goes to my subject. For the bear, I was standing up, which is probably a good idea around bears. Now, don't ever run from a bear. That's a bad idea, but you know, it might not be the best idea to lie on the ground when you're photographing a bear. So you've got to keep safety in mind too. And then doing something like taking an airplane ride. This was photographed from an airplane. And you can get some really wonderful images from the air as well. And there are lots of opportunities to do that. You can go in balloons, helicopters, airplanes. So, you know, when you have that opportunity, think about it as well. It's just a nice, different perspective that we don't often see. When I go to Africa, obviously we're photographing inside vehicles so that we're not walking out around the wildlife. And so, you know, that can be really nice too. But in this particular image, you know, it happened so fast. I was on a beanbag and I could not raise the camera. So, you know, I have this line that I don't like at all. If I'd had a little more time, I would have just stacked another beanbag on top so that I could get a cleaner background and avoid this line going through the image. And also there's a little, I don't know, you probably can't see it well on the screen in the room. Maybe you can at home. But there's also a little blade of grass. And in this image, it happened to just kind of stick in neutral space. But in some of my other images, it was going right through the cub. So, you know, those are things that are sometimes difficult to control when you're in a vehicle and the wildlife is moving. So, you know, sometimes you just have to wait for a better opportunity. And they finally moved over and sat at this location for a while. And then I was able to get the angle I wanted, get that cleaner background. There's nothing distracting, and it was a really wonderful situation. So it's also really critically important to identify your subject. So always ask yourself, what is the subject of the photograph? Every other element in the composition should support the subject. And if you can't answer that question, the composition probably needs work. So sometimes the subject is really obvious that there's not even a question about it, right? The bird. But this image shows more of the environment, but the subject is the climber, and the ice supports the subject by giving her room to move. So it's a sense of place. Now, if you look at this image, though, is the subject the iceberg or the penguins? So I can tell you for a fact that the subject was the iceberg because when I first framed the image, the penguins weren't even there. They popped up as I was composing. So this image, the penguins provide scale. If you're having trouble deciding, think about if you took the penguins away, would you still have a photograph? So in this case, you would. This is a very interesting iceberg and nicely laid out. But in the previous image, the ice really wasn't interesting enough that it would stand on its own. And if you have time, experiment with different compositional combinations. You know, think about things like your magnification. Are you going to use a wide angle lens or a telephoto lens? And maybe try both if you can. That's where zoom lenses are really nice because you can get some different focal lengths. Think about your perspective, straight on or at an angle or lying down or standing up or standing on a stool. And orientation, don't forget to shoot some vertical frames and some horizontal frames if it will work for that particular scene. So I do mostly wildlife, but this was in Africa and we had a bunch of time at midday. So they have these really interesting baskets on the wall. And so, you know, it was fun to play with the patterns. And so I just, again, used different focal lengths and different perspectives to take images that are all, you know, interesting. And you can do the same thing with landscapes or wildlife if you have time. So this is really, I think, one of my favorite waterfalls in Iceland. It's just beautiful. And you can do so many things with it. But you know, just standing in the same location, I can take this overview, which is beautiful. And the water there is, the color is just incredible. But then I can crop in a little bit more. And again, that makes a really nice composition. Or I can go to a vertical and crop even a little bit more. So I have really a lot of options standing in one place. So it really, you know, exhaust those opportunities and don't just take the first shot and leave. Sometimes there are lots of images within an image. So you also want to include great light, and good light is paramount to every great photograph, but it can also be used as a component of the composition. We can use light to direct the viewer. So what is it that you want to emphasize? Without light, this image wouldn't work at all. The light identifies the subject of the photographs, of this photograph, which is the trees and the fall color. And when I got to this location, this is in Grand Teton National Park, it really looked dreary. It didn't look promising at all. But I set up and I waited, and there just happened to be a crack in the clouds behind me, and the sun just peeked through that crack, and it you know, made all the difference. You know, where do you want the viewer to look? The light tells the viewer exactly where to look if you use it properly. So in this was in Florida. And again, I just had some streaming light coming through and it just hit the eyes. And when it did that, that's when I took the image. And keep in mind that the eye is always going to go to the brightest part of the image. So again, you can use light to lead your viewer through the image. So because it's in the back, you'll still look at things, but it's going to lead you to the back of the image. You can also take an image like this. This is a macro shot. And I did stack this, so I did multiple frames on it. But this is just in the natural environment, but I always take a background with me when I'm going to do macro photography. And so then I can also, and I take diffusers as well. So I can adjust things like the quality of light and the background, and light only the subject. And I get a completely different image that way. And they're both nice, but they're different. So again, thinking about everything you can do to make your image effective. Backlight is another great tool to make your composition really effective. This was in Yellowstone National Park. With the steam coming up, it's a great place to get backlight. If you happen to have the elk there, that's the challenging part. Leaves in the fall are wonderful. This one I just took and I put it on a light box. So if you still have an old light box from the slide days, this is a great thing to use it for. So you get really nice color and patterns. And obviously on this screen, we're not seeing the vibrancy we normally would. So if you want to see any of these afterwards, feel free to come up and I can show you the images where you're going to get a much better sense of the true color. It's just, I know it's a little slow on the screen here, so it's faster on my computer.
The internet's getting cold.
It is. It is. It's cooling down outside, so it doesn't want to work as hard here. But the color of light is also important. So this has light hitting the mountaintop, so that leads you there. But the color also helps to direct you through the image. And then we also are going to want to optimize in post-processing, because not every perfect composition can be captured in camera, especially with moving subjects like wildlife. So with wildlife, we're going to be using cropping a lot in post-processing to make sure we get the best composition possible. And so just like we had with the app, in Photoshop and Lightroom, we do have some guides, they just don't give us as many. So you have some grids that you can overlay on your image, which I would encourage you to do when you're cropping. And don't just, again, it might default to rule of thirds, but there are other options there. So think about all of the different types of compositional, grids you could use, and don't be afraid to switch around and see what they do. So that's how I was able, when I cropped this image, and it was fairly tight to start with, but I was able to just line it up perfect with that phi grid. And then there are images like this where, it was a great blast off, but, I really don't think that the ground at the bottom is helping my composition. That's just distracting my eye. And really at the top of the image, they're separating more than I'd like to have. So in this image, I just made it a long panorama. And I think that's a much more effective composition for this image. So you don't, you have a certain canvas that you're working on, but you don't have to use that. So, when you're composing, think about how you're going to crop it later as well, because you might have a really nice image that doesn't fit the proportions of our camera.
Make that one a puzzle.
Yeah, right. That would be a great puzzle, wouldn't it? Yes, that's true. I should do that. That would be torture. Yes. That might drive people crazy. And again, sometimes the wildlife doesn't cooperate and it doesn't move out of the way. Now you can take, you could take that, the one that's on the left out in Photoshop, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with doing that, but you can also just use cropping. So if you don't like using the computer, it makes a really nice square image, and square images are really popular too. So there's nothing wrong with thinking in different proportions. We also want to notice negative space and leave an appropriate amount of space around our subject. So we sometimes filling the frame is great, but in this instance, I had really interesting patterns in the water. So leaving some negative space works very well. This is another composite image. So I had the caribou in silhouette against a really uninteresting sky. But I could pre-visualize and know that I could add something more interesting in the background and make it a really nice composition and photograph. Whenever you have a moving subject, you want to make sure you put more room in front of it so it has room to move into the frame. And again, you can do some of that with cropping, but when you're photographing, always make sure that you're leaving more room in front than in back. And then, if you are trying to fill the frame, you also need to make sure that you don't crowd the subject. And, sometimes like here I was in a vehicle and I was at a distance with my 600mm. I had no option to zoom, but, I just was crowding the back. So I was a little bit too tight anyway. And again, we can use tools in Photoshop to expand the canvas and give us the extra space we need, but this is too tight on the back. And then simplify the elements. In your final evaluation, make sure you just keep it simple. Simpler images tend to be much more effective than those that are too busy or complex. So this again was in Africa, and it's a nice group of elephants, but it's way too busy. The background is busy. I don't really know where to look. And I would have, if I could have zoomed in more, I would have, but they were all the way on the other side of the river. So that just wasn't going to happen. But again, I can crop. And with programs like Topaz Gigapixel, I can enlarge this image quite a bit. So even if I crop dramatically and include only what I really need to make it effective, I can use other tools so that I can print it larger. And this is a much, much stronger image that's within an image. So when you have a scene and you can't get any closer, look within the image and see if you have a composition that you can crop. So to recap, communicate your message, observe your surroundings, make equipment choices, pre-visualize the end result, obey the rules, select the vantage point, identify the subject, take multiple frames, include great light, optimize in post-processing, notice negative space, and simplify the elements. And that's supposed composition, yes, if you didn't catch that. And last but not least, practice. I mean, practice is probably the best thing you can do to improve your photography. So study master photographers, give yourself assignments. Self-assignments are a great thing to do to push yourself to learn new things, and have your work critiqued. I think critiques by somebody who really knows what they're doing are exceptionally valuable. So I'll take questions here. Before I do that, I'll just tell you a little bit about some of my upcoming workshops, and please feel free to join my mailing list or fill out a form on my website so that I can reach out to you if there are things that you're interested in. I'm constantly adding more tours, so this is just a small selection of what I'm working on. But many of you might know I always teach at the Crane Trust every March, which is a wonderful experience. We get over 1 million sandhill cranes that come through the area every March. And we do a workshop program, which is really for people who want classroom time and want to learn photography. And we do a really intense, in-depth instruction. So it's a wonderful program. I think it's the best program. I wish everybody would take it before they went on some of these other big trips, because you just learn so much. But for people who are advanced and they don't need that, we also offer tours, which are really just access to the blinds. We'll give you some helpful tips, but that's when I get to photograph all of my marketing pictures for the program. So during the workshop, we really concentrate on teaching you. I also do prairie chickens, not too far away from the Crane Trust. I'm working on trips to Iceland. I do Tanzania typically every September, sometimes in May as well if there's demand. I'm working on Patagonia, other places around the world too. So if there's somewhere you want to go, just ask, and I might have something in the works. I'm getting ready to go to Mexico for the monarchs. We have a really unique situation in Mexico, which I don't know how many years it's going to last, because if you've ever researched it, most of the reserves there, they rope everything off and they only allow you about 20 minutes with the butterflies, and that's really not enough time. So we have reserves that we're going to that allow us to stay hours, and they don't rope things off. So I don't know, again, if that gets too discovered, it might change as well, but right now it's a great opportunity. And then Antarctica, it just kind of depends on the year if we're going to go or not. And then I do private tours and instruction too, but I'm always happy to take suggestions, because sometimes if you want to go somewhere, I can find other people on my list who want to go as well and put something more custom together. So, please feel free to join my list or email me or even call me. I actually like phone calls. So I'm happy to talk to you about places you might want to go. So let me, I'll stop sharing here and then we can take questions. Wow, that's right.
I don't have any questions online.
No questions online? If you have questions online, just put them in the chat for us and we'll get them. But any questions in the room? No?
Do you use in-camera focus stacking ever?
I don't really like to do that kind of stuff in camera because I prefer to work with the raw files.
Okay.
So I don't. But I mean, you certainly can. I just think you have so much more information in your raw files that I do everything I can with the raw files. So high dynamic range, all of that, I take it out and I use the raw files. Yeah.
Are you mirrorless?
I am mirrorless now. I mean, I shot with digital SLRs for years, but the mirrorless, the iFocus technology is so amazing that I think it's hard not to switch at this point. And the sensor, I mean, I'm shooting with the R5, the Canon R5, and the sensor is just phenomenal. So, there's nothing wrong with the digital SLR, but I think if you do switch to mirrorless and you use some of the new tools we have available, it's really mind-blowing. I mean, it's just incredible. It really is. I can turn my camera back on here too for the people online. Hold on to me. There we go.
I don't want to see.
Yeah, I'll get that back on so everybody online can see it. So, yes, but mirrorless, I highly recommend it. I mean, all the all the brands are good. It used to be, I mean, Sony really, I think, pushed everybody in that direction. And I wasn't too optimistic about it at first, but once I picked one up and saw how well the eye focusing, was, I switched right away. Because, one of the things about wildlife is if you're trying to keep a point on your subject to focus, you can't focus on your composition as well, right? Because you need to keep in mind where the focus point is. With eye focus, if it's tracking well, I can just ignore where the focus is going because it's going to take care of it for me, and I can concentrate on my composition. So it's a great way to improve composition with wildlife photography. Yes.
You went to your rare list and find yourself shooting more video.
I don't, I need to shoot more video, but I don't. I find it very hard to do stills and videos. They're really two different animals. And so, I've always been a still photographer and I still love it. If I do video, I tend to do it with my phone.
Right.
Yeah. The video cameras and phones these days are amazing. So. Anybody else?
I guess we're all stunned with your presentation. It was very good.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, you got some photos here, you talked about having square images,
Mhm.
and there was one of a wood duck there in a square image. But with no leading space on the front, so is it still fine like that?
So if you're, you can be tight. I mean, it's preferable to leave a little bit of space in front, but again, you have to make a judgment call. As long as you have a comfortable amount of space on the two sides, you just, like the oh, now my brain just thank you, warthog. Thank you very much. Yes, they're so cute. It just wouldn't come. But anyway, the warthog, there just wasn't enough space. I mean, it feels crowded. So it's really more about, how does it feel to you? When you look at your composition, if you feel crowded, then you need to give some more space. If it doesn't feel crowded, then it's all right to go in close. But and I see a lot of times I see people cropping too tight, like if they have a bird or something standing in water, because they don't leave enough room to where the feet would be. So if you can't see the feet, make sure that you're leaving space below where the feet would be. So that would be comfortable. Yeah, you have to, right. You always have to be thinking about these things. And you can crop into animals too. But again, I try not to crop at joints. That's true of people too. Don't try and crop directly at a joint, like at the knees. Make sure you crop like mid-thigh. That's much more pleasing than if you crop at a joint on animals or people. So, I mean, just all these little things that you think about and you learn as you do more of it. But that's where, again, critiques are great. Because if you take your own images and then let somebody critique them who really knows what they're doing, they'll point those things out to you and you'll learn a lot.
Do you want to judge for us on? But I'm not actually judging on that one. The other thing I was going to say is, to your point, a lot of the things that you brought up, and where we have judges that are very accomplished and so forth, such as yourself. A lot of the things that you brought up tonight, those are the things that we all know we have to pay attention to whenever we're submitting our images for competition, whether it's quality here, the rules, the birds, and so forth, and that and again, just the lighting, where what's the strongest part of the light. A lot of we put in a summary a lot of the very things that we hear in any given competition, and that. So this was real helpful. That's great.
Good, I'm glad.
Yeah.
Some of the publications that you've been in, did you know you were going to be in them before? In other words, did you plan your photo to copy in the front page or wide enough for a double truck, or something like that?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I don't do as much publishing as I used to do. I'm doing more workshops nowadays, but in the days when I was shooting more stock photography for publications, I would always think about that. So negative space doesn't just have to be pleasing to the composition. I might be thinking, hey, this could go in a magazine and they could put the text here. Or I might leave more space on top if I thought it would be a good cover photo, so they'd have room for the masthead. So absolutely. I mean, if you're, thinking about the purpose of your photographs is important too, because you might compose completely differently than you would for just a print that's going on the wall, for example.
To the ward on photo, it was just a little too tight at the back.
It was a lot too tight of a line, yeah.
When I saw that, my thought was, what if you pan farther to the left and actually you just intentionally cut a little bit off the animal to give it more room in front?
No. I don't think that would have worked. What would have worked, if I wanted to crop into it, I would have cropped off the bottom and the top. So just cropping the back off would again look awkward. It would be kind of like cutting the animal in half. But if I wanted to crop in, I could have cropped into the body so that I don't have feet anymore and gotten the bird and just the head. And that would have been an option too. Yeah, and that's like one of the things that I do in the workshops too, is I'll take, like at the Crane Trust, is I'll take an image and I'll say, here's one image and I'll show you different ways I would crop it. So you can start to see. And then when I look at your images too, I'll say, well, what if you cropped it like this? Or what if you cropped it like that? And oftentimes there are multiple ways that you could crop an image that would be effective, but just chopping it in half like that would not work well. So in that image, if I really wanted to work on it, I would just expand the canvas and I would build, more room in the back with Photoshop. And now, I don't know, do people in here use Photoshop or Lightroom? We have the generative fill now, which is AI. I mean, you could do it before, but it was a lot more work. Generative AI is just incredible. So it is, I have to say, I'm not a big fan of AI in terms of just putting text prompts in to create images. I think that's really almost theft of other people's work. I really do. But I think that as long as you're working on your own image, if you're doing something like expanding the canvas, I think AI is a great tool to have. It just does a better job. But you're not taking anybody else's work to do that. It's just taking your elements and expanding it. Or like noise reduction. A lot of that's AI now. Again, that's a tool that you're using on your own image. But just typing a text prompt in, it's trained on everybody else's work and nobody's getting credit or payment or anything else. So yeah. Well, Adobe, yes. Yes, I know Adobe, and I think Adobe's smart to do that. Adobe is, they're limiting their searches to the Adobe stock portfolio so that photographers agree and there is, some way to compensate them. But in the other programs, they've trained on the entire internet. So any image that's on the internet, that could be used. Yeah.
You're using your image. I do have a question
So,
online.
Yes.
What do you recommend for photographing wildlife in low light, ISO question?
Okay, what do I recommend?
Yeah, what do you recommend for photographing wildlife in low light and then high ISO? Or I guess it's two questions.
Okay, let me see if I can read the
You should be able to read it.
Yeah. Let me just see if I can get a better sense of it.
It's down there way. Right there.
Oh, okay. So do I recommend using a high ISO? Yeah, if you're in low light and you have to have a high ISO to capture the image, that's what I would do. And then I would use something like Topaz to take the noise out. I mean, if you sacrifice your settings too much and you don't have a usable shot, then what was the point? So, I think it's wonderful in digital that we can use a higher ISO. And these sensors are so good nowadays that you can really push them much further than, was even imaginable a few years ago. So I would say, use the settings you need to get the shot and let the ISO go where it has to go, and then take the noise out on the computer. If you even need to. Yeah.
So I'll kind of tag on to that question, and that was
Sure.
a little bit more. So let's just say like low light and moving action, like birds in flight, let's call it that, in low light. And all 100% manual or shutter priority with let the ISO do what you're talking about, let it run, or
No. No. I wish they would take shutter priority and aperture priority off of the cameras.
okay, so all manual.
Manual auto ISO.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
If I can add to that a little
Yeah.
bit, I was at the stock show on Monday, shooting dog agility in one of the arenas, and I do dog photography and I do dog agility, and it literally was pitch black. Pitch black in there, except for some very spotlight every so often. And I had the Canon R7 with the 70-200 2.8 lens, and it struggled. And I was able to capture images at 32,000 ISO and recover them. And this is an example of one,
Wow,
right?
that's
So the
great.
camera will,
Yeah,
and people are like 32, and I had to be at a shutter speed of
right.
at least 1600 to be able to get that image at 2.8.
Yep.
And some of them were 2000 shutter speed, because anything less, it wouldn't be shutter.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. If you don't, I mean, intentional blur is another way to deal with it. But if you don't, if you want a sharp image, you have to use a certain shutter speed. So you're better off just letting the ISO go.
I'm just letting
Yeah.
it do.
And just let it, yeah.
Yeah, and some images, there just wasn't enough light. I needed the 1.4 or 1.2 lens
Right.
to get the light, but it was.
I know. It can be tough, but I mean, some of these images we couldn't even take in the film days. I mean, it just wasn't possible. So it's amazing what we can do.
So shooting rivers in flight,
Yes.
speed. 1200 minimum, 1600.
That's a bigger question than we think it was, right? And so that, that's one of the things that I talk a lot about in my workshops, because, people, they want you to tell you, well, what's the best setting for this? And what's the best setting for that? And it is not a simple answer. You would think it was, but it's not. There are so many elements to deciding what the right settings are. So it depends on magnification. It depends on the speed of the bird. It depends on so many different factors. So different subjects require different shutter speeds, which is why, practice, testing things, going to workshops and really learning different subjects, like a hummingbird. I mean, some flaps of hummingbird wings you can't even freeze with, an 8,000th of a second, because they go too fast. So we use flash for that. So that's where, it's really situation dependent.
Got a question online.
Yeah.
What do you think of sky replacement?
I like sky replacement. I think especially for landscapes, because when, landscapes really are so weather dependent. You can have a great scene, but if you don't have a good sky or good weather, it might not be a dramatic shot. So, and if you have the time to wait, that's great. I mean, I would prefer to get everything in one shot if I can. But if you have nice light on the scene, but the sky is just terrible, I think sky replacement is a wonderful thing to do. Now, again, I'm really in favor of photographing your own skies to put in. Again, I think if it's your work, I would always default to saying you should take the components that you're going to put together. You can get skies and people do that, and for commercial work, of course, they're going to do that sort of thing. But if you're really trying to do your own fine art, go out and photograph skies so that you have some options.
And in our competitions, that's one of our rules, is that sky replacements are allowed, but it has to be a sky that you photographed.
You photographed, yeah.
Kind of add on this, now a comment, but I want your thoughts.
Sure.
One of the things I don't, since you shoot so many wildlife,
Yes.
one of the things I don't like about wildlife photography is it almost tends to be photojournalistic. Like if it wasn't there, you can't hardly edit it. I've seen people lose their mind for picking twigs out of the front of the bird or whatever. And when you're doing some compositing, I mean, I love to shoot for the edit, right?
Yeah.
And it was just refreshing actually to see that you do that sometimes, or maybe even do a sky replacement with a bird in the background or a background replacement. Like I said, the wildlife judges just lose their mind. I just wondered what your comments were.
Yeah, sure. No, I can really comment on that. And I think it's really interesting because, I mean, I started photography in the film days. And so, in the film days, we didn't have Photoshop when I first started taking pictures. And so you had to capture everything in the camera. But, to me, the computer is just another tool. And I think as long as the way you use the tools is appropriate for the end use of the image, you should do whatever you can to make your image better. So, if you're doing something for a magazine or a newspaper that is supposed to be straight photography, and I have a whole nother presentation I do about that, which is interesting too, in terms of, what is really straight photography. But, if they want you basically to show what was in your frame, then I don't think you can manipulate it a lot in Photoshop. That's journalistic photography. And so you have to follow those rules. If you're doing something to hang on the wall as art, I think you should use whatever tool you have to make it a better image. And personally, I don't like the contests that are so restrictive. I think they're just kind of caught back in the film days, to be honest. I ran a contest for the Colorado Environmental Film Festival for a while. And when I took over that contest, I said, look, the only way I want to do this is if we're going to allow creativity. I don't want to restrict people to just what's in the frame. And we got some really amazing work because we allowed people to do whatever they want. Some very conceptual work that I think conveyed, principles of conservation better than if they just showed us a straight photograph. So to me, you have to follow the rules of whatever organization you're working with. So if it's a newspaper, obviously you're not going to be able to change things a lot. If it's a contest that has those rules, then you either don't enter or you enter things that comply with the rules. But personally, I think it's a tool that we should all be using. And I also think that there are times when using the computer is better for the subject as well. For instance, if you do have a situation where there are branches sticking into the frame, I would much rather have a photographer take that out in Photoshop than go try and tear a bunch of branches down. Sometimes you could take a branch down in your own backyard or something. It's not a big deal. But there are also, I've seen images in the past where people have cleared a whole bunch of brush in front of a nest or something, and that's dangerous for the wildlife. So, if you can just get an angle where you can take some of those blades of grass or whatever out in Photoshop, we're doing something to protect our subject as well. So, I've never understood the objection to it. I just haven't understood the objection to it, depending on your use. Does that answer your question?
And what kind of equipment do you use? What kind of camera do you use?
So I use the Canon R5, which is a full frame. I like full frame sensors. I've got a lot of room to crop. The frame rate isn't quite as fast, but honestly, it's fast enough. I still think it's important to anticipate and try and pick the decisive moment, right? I think too many people just lay on the shutter and what they call it, spray and pray, right? Is that really photography? So learning to anticipate and pressing the shutter release and doing short bursts. Even when I'm teaching wildlife photography, I teach people, if you're photographing a bird, don't start firing the camera over here when it's in bad light. Follow it, because we need to follow it like we would a baseball bat, right? But follow it when it gets to the good light and the good background, then do your short burst and then follow through without firing. So, anticipate and think about what you're taking and when you're pressing that button. When we had 36 frames, you really had to think about when you press the shutter release, right?
And I think the fastest frame rate was 10 frames per second.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
3 seconds, you were done.
Right.
No more questions.
Does that help?
Any more
Anybody
questions?
online or no? We're good.
Well, thanks very much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That was really good. A lot of the things are the things that we all need to keep in mind when we one, go out and take the images, but two, enter them into competitions and so forth.
And we can book you for February 7th.
I'm gonna be gone. Otherwise, I'd be glad to, but yeah.
We'll get you on one of the other.
Okay, sounds good.
So,
We'll send you our list.
That is great. You can put that back up, but I'd like to take a picture.
Composition.
Yeah, or composition.
Composition, sure. Let me see here.
And for those of you at home, the recording will be online in a couple of weeks. It'll be,
yeah, but this is a great turnout tonight too. I think I
It
counted
is.
really close to 30 people here in and probably another 15 or so online.
yeah, so it'll be available to watch. And I'm putting everything up at 1080p now. I tried.
Oh, wait, I have,
small
it has to
and-
build it. It'll build it here.
It's
Just-
fine.
Yeah. It's a build.
Anticipation.
That's right.
Do we, to access online, are we changing the code?
The password is not changed as of yet. Right, Chuck? Yeah, so. Won't change? Won't change.
Cheryl, when you have the automatic ISO,
In my cameras, and I'm sure yours has the same, you can set a maximum. Do you set a maximum? I don't, I just watch it. Okay. I mean, you know, again, you move the settings you need, so, you know, if I think it's, I don't wanna take the picture, I just don't take the picture. You know? I mean, sometimes you do just have to enjoy things too, so there's nothing wrong with that. When I take a picture. When I put chips in our brain someday, then we can just take pictures all the time.